the topic of today, which is supporting your mood and your emotions through nutrition and lifestyle, because we can't really talk about having healthy emotions if we're not taking care of our body. So okay, so there's a couple things to know when we are having when we are working on our mind and our emotions. How many of you know? No answer, it's bad, I barely sleep. Okay. Like, I plead the fifth. I refuse to answer. Oh, I know. Yeah, I'll tell you a story about my sleep here in a little bit. But how many of you have ever felt like you go, like, your kids are sick, or maybe you have a dog that was up barfing, or, the neighbors were partying really loud, and you wake up that day and you just kind of feel a little bit off, right? Like, your mood doesn't feel great. You feel a little bit more snappy than you normally would. Your hunger cues are off. Like, I noticed for myself, if I don't get enough sleep, like, I either have no appetite or I'm hungry all day long. Like, there's no in between. And that is because our blood sugar regulation is very much tied to our cortisol levels. And our cortisol levels will either spike really high or drop really low if we're not getting really good sleep. Now, 1 or 2 nights isn't going to harm you forever, but we know, there are certain hormone imbalances, chronic stress, things like that, that will really, really disrupt our sleep patterns, which then can absolutely throw off our mood and our emotions. And primarily the mechanism for that is actually blood sugar regulation. So we're going to talk about some ways to stabilize our blood sugar and help our sleep patterns. And the interesting thing is that our sleep patterns, most of us don't think about our sleep being a 24-hour cycle, right? We're thinking about our sleep being that 7 to 8 hour chunk of time that we're actually asleep. But our sleep cycle actually starts during the day and how we're managing our cortisol and our blood sugar throughout the day. All of that's going to impact our sleep. Does that make sense? Okay. So some things that I would start with, and I cannot even tell you how many women I work with on hormones that are like, my sleep is in the toilet. And, and so then I'm like, oh, okay, well, they get surprised because the first thing I ask them is how often they're eating. How often are you eating? What are you eating? How many calories do you eat in a day? Are you, going 5 to 6 hours between meals? Like, all of that stuff is going to short circuit your cortisol, which is going to make your sleep feel like crap. It just is. So the very first thing, and I know that this goes against intermittent fasting, it goes against keto principles, it goes against pretty much every mainstream diet out there, but because I work primarily with women, I'm just going to tell you what works for most women metabolically, assuming they don't have like major health issues. Okay. Eating every 3 hours. If you are not hungry every 3 to 4 hours, your metabolism is probably not doing what it's supposed to be doing. Okay. So I did keto for a year, and then I did intermittent fasting for like 6 to 7 months. And then I realized that was dumb because my adrenals were in the toilet, and I didn't realize my adrenals were in the toilet until I started having like massive adrenal issues because I had been pushing my body too long between eating. So that drop in blood sugar was enough to tell my body, hey, you're actually putting us in fight or flight here. Like, that's too much stress for my body. So it took me, after I realized that was happening and was working with my doctor, about 9 months to actually get my hunger cues back in the morning. So if you are not hungry within about 30 to 45 minutes of waking up, that's a pretty good indicator that your metabolism has been shut down because of cortisol and blood sugar. And there's no way for that not to impact your mood and your sleep long-term. Okay, does that make sense? Like, it may not be impacting you now, but eventually if you do that long enough and you ignore it long enough, it's going to create issues down the road. Does that make sense? Okay, so eat every 2 to 3 hours. There should be protein with every single meal that you have. Like, if we're talking breakfast, lunch, and dinner, you want to aim for 20 to 30 grams of protein with every meal. Okay. So that can be tricky to do, especially if you're like, my appetite's not great to begin with, and you're telling me I have to eat meat. Like, no, you don't have to eat meat in the morning. There's a lot of different things that you can do. Eggs are awesome. Eggs are, delicious in the morning. They're high in protein. They're great, source of minerals. But they're also things like collagen peptides. My appetite, like this last year, just because of stress, has not been awesome in the morning. I tend to feel just kind of like ugh in the morning. Okay. So, but I still, because I know that my blood sugar and my cortisol depend on me feeding it good, nutritious food, I will add collagen peptides to my tea, even if I can't eat a meal yet, because I'm wanting to get that protein in as soon as I'm hungry in the morning. Okay. And I will just say that if you don't have hunger cues in the morning, you're going to have to train your metabolism to feel hungry again. Like for me, I was like, I'm going to eat every 3 hours until my body starts to recognize, like, oh, we should be hungry every 3 hours. We're not in fight or flight mode anymore. We can do this, like we can digest and we can rest and everything's going to be good. So, and eventually that did kick in to where now I am hungry every 3 to 4 hours and I'm not having these like crazy blood sugar dips and things like that. Okay. So if you guys have a favorite protein source and you want to put it in the chat, like I love to eat, sausage with my breakfast, or I love to have eggs with greens, or I love to have a smoothie. Those will be great ideas for people. So please feel free to share whatever your favorite, breakfast, lunch, and dinner proteins are. I know for me, lunch tends to be either like a salad with some kind of lean meat and fat. Dinner, tends to be more of like meat and potatoes and root vegetables and things like that. Let's see here. And then the other thing is, once you start to get where you are eating consistently every 3 to 4 hours, your next goal is actually going to be making sure that you're eating enough during that time. Most of us are not eating enough during the times that we're actually eating. My husband actually pointed this out to me. He's like, you realize you eat like a bird, right? Like most people don't eat like that. And I was like, well, that's how I've always eaten. I think it was just part of being a nursing student, working 3 jobs and going to school full time and working night shift, and wrecked my appetite, and my HPA axis did not do me any favors. So I've had to learn to actually sit down, look at my plate, and be very aware of my body when I'm eating. So now I sit there and I ask myself, am I full, or did I just stop eating because I want to be busy doing something else? Like my brain is wanting to finish the task in the next room, right? Instead of, no, I need to sit here until I've actually, it's not the belief of like, you have to finish your plate. That's not what I'm saying. It's more just an awareness of my body. Am I full, or am I just not hungry anymore? Because those are 2 different sensations. I tend to eat until I'm not hungry anymore, which is not the same as eating until you're satisfied. Does that make sense? Okay. So making sure you're eating enough. How do you know if you're eating enough food? You're typically not hungry at bedtime. If you're hungry at bedtime, your body needs more calories during the day. So I notice even like throughout my cycle, sometimes that fluctuates where different parts of my cycle, I do have, like, I'm more hungry in the nighttime or at bedtime. I don't not snack. I know that's like another dieting taboo. Don't eat after 7. That's garbage if you're a woman. Okay. If you are a woman and you have cortisol and you have adrenal glands and you have the need to produce progesterone, you are going to need to snack sometimes in the evening. And I'm not saying like eat half a pizza and, a Burgerville milkshake. You can do that too. But I'm saying you're probably not going to feel super awesome if you do. But for me, that's like an apple and peanut butter and a stick of jerky. Or I will oftentimes eat like a full fat coconut yogurt that's like 20 grams of fat, a little bit of protein, add some berries in there, and I'm good. If you are hungry during, at bedtime, you need to make sure that you are giving yourself that nutrition. And I want to explain why nutrition matters when it comes to our sleep and our mood. Number one, because our neurotransmitters, our happy mood chemicals, serotonin, dopamine, melatonin, that all helps with sleep, is produced by protein. So the amino acids that come from protein that are broken down are actually then transported to your cells, and they are then made into serotonin and dopamine. So if you're like, gosh, why am I so moody? Or why do I feel like, I just can't regulate my mood? I know for me, I feel anxious if I'm hungry. Like if my blood sugar is low, I'll feel anxiety. I don't feel like, oh, I'm really hungry right now. I feel like my heart's racing really fast. And so, and that's gotten better as my adrenals have healed and I've gotten my blood sugar regulation a little bit more under control. But we can't separate our mood and our emotions from what's happening in our physical body. Okay. This is why, making sure that we are eating good meals, we're getting enough protein. Sometimes I have to get creative just because of grocery limitations or, like our favorite allergy friendly things aren't as easily accessible as they used to be. So I have to get a little bit creative with those things. But if you are noticing that your emotions are all over the place, right? You're like, gosh, some days I'm really anxious, some days I'm really moody, some days I'm really depressed. No judgment on that at all, but we got to look at the reasons why that might be happening. Typically, when we're looking at, somebody's diet, their nutrition, and their sleep, there's something in all three of those categories. Not getting enough protein, not eating enough calories, and going too long between meals. Whether you have diagnosed blood sugar issues or not, there's a lot of studies that actually show, if we're looking at mood dysregulation and emotional imbalances, a lot of that is tied to blood sugar and making sure we're getting enough food. So some other things to look at when we're looking at making sure we're getting those nutrients. We want to make sure that your body's actually absorbing them. So a lot of us have, some issues with our gut where our gut isn't actually absorbing the nutrients that we're getting. And this can be for a lot of different reasons. Typically it's from stress. And remember, stress doesn't have to be you had a major life event, right? Stress can be choosing to go too long between meals or waking up and not eating for 2 hours before you actually eat something. It's whatever your body perceives as a stressor. Okay. So, and for every single one of you, that's going to be different. It could be your child coughing in the middle of the night. Your body's like, wait a second, like that's a stressor, right? It could be your dog barking and, at the mailman, and that like heightens your a level of arousal in the brain where your brain is now on hyper alert. That is a perceived stressor. So I want you to not, when I'm talking about stress, don't be thinking about the stressors in your life, right? Of like maybe a family member that's sick or a job that's really stressful. Yes, those are stressors, but I want you to think about the stressors that are actually within your control. And those are typically like how we're taking care of ourselves in terms of how often are we eating? Am I, like I started blocking out my afternoon from 12 to 1 most days because I'm like, I need to prioritize sitting down and having an actual meal during the day because it was throwing off my cortisol by the evening time. And it was awful. It's not a fun feeling to have your cortisol and your blood sugar just all over the place like that. So, is this making sense to everybody so far? I know I'm kind of going fast. Okay. So thinking about, when we think about managing stressors, we're not just talking about those external stressors that we know that we can't change, right? Like maybe we can't change our family dynamics or the job situation that we're in or inflation. Like we can't change any of those things, but I can change how my body perceives stress, AKA, am I nourishing it? Am I prioritizing it? And am I taking care of my body? Okay. All right. Okay, so when we're talking about absorption, because your body has to absorb nutrients through the digestive tract, unless you're just absorbing them all through the mucosal lining of your mouth, which just doesn't happen unless you're taking everything by supplements, right? Everything has to go through the digestive tract. How many of you, I'm just a show of hands, have ever been on antibiotics? Lots and lots and lots. For me as a kid, lots of antibiotics. How many of you have ever experienced bloating? You've ever had a stomach bug? You've ever had, like a vomiting diarrhea illness? Okay. So and you've experienced periods of chronic stress, right? Most of us have. All right. So all of these things impact our digestive tract's ability to, number one, manage microbes, which means that it knows how to intuitively keep bacteria in the right places. Okay. So if there's bacterial overgrowth, let's say, for example, I'll use my youngest daughter. She had to go on antibiotics for, I think it was either an ear, I think it wasn't an ear infection. It was a bladder infection, like 3 or 4 years ago. And the antibiotics, they did their job in getting rid of the UTI, but they also left this nice friendly bug called c-diff. And c-diff is not a friendly bug, but everybody has it in their gut, right? And it was just high enough that it gave her pretty severe diarrhea and made her grumpier than I have ever seen her in my life. Like, anybody who knows Olivia knows she is not grumpy. Like, she's the happiest, sweetest, most cheerful. Yes, Michelle knows, just like loving, squishy person, you know? So when I was like, man, this is not like her. Like, what is going on? And I'd had her on probiotics at the same time. So I was giving her the good stuff, but you have to treat C. diff very differently. So things like C. diff, bacterial overgrowth in the wrong place, even just having it in the wrong place in your gut, will throw off this whole cascade. And now the interesting thing about C. diff is that it actually competes with dopamine. What does dopamine do? Dopamine is your reward hormone. So it's that thing that gives you motivation. It makes you feel like you can go get it throughout your day. It makes you feel like you're regulated, you're calm, like you can handle what's going, you can handle the tasks in front of you, you can organize the tasks in front of you, and you have the motivation to do it. That's dopamine. So C. diff eats up all of your dopamine, not just in the gut, but also in the brain. So for me, whenever somebody's talking about their mood, their emotions, I'm never just thinking about the soul level emotions that somebody's experiencing. I'm also looking at, how's their body? Do they have some infections going on that we don't know about? Is there something competing? Are they eating regular meals? Whenever somebody tells me they have anxiety, I mean, yes, I'm looking at the social aspect of that in terms of their life, right? The things that are going on in their life that could be causing that. But my first thought now is, did you eat something? Like, because as a woman, like, if the anxiety goes away when you eat something, then it's a blood sugar regulation issue. Okay. So that being said, we want to make sure that as we're looking at, how is my mood actually doing? Do I feel moody a lot? Do I feel anxious a lot? Do I feel depressed more than makes sense maybe for my circumstances? Then the next thing that you should be looking at is, how am I supporting my digestive tract? Number one of the best things that you can do is eating without stress. Okay. So for me, what that means is I'm very, very cognizant that I am not working on my phone or like looking at stressful things while I'm eating. So that's like, I can watch puppy dog reels and reels of cute babies and things like that are like, they boost your dopamine, right? But they're not creating a stress response in my body while I'm eating, because a body that is under stress won't digest, and it will actually shut down your ability to absorb all of those good nutrients that you're trying to feed your body. So things like that. How many of you are recognizing like little habits that you're like, oh, I could probably do that a little bit differently? Yeah, me too. Me too. And truthfully, like for a lot of years, and I'm sure this is true for most of you in one way, shape, or form, like if you're going through a period of really high stress, you're not thinking about those things, right? You're not thinking about, how do I actively calm my vagus nerve and calm my body so that when I'm eating, it's not a stressful experience and my body has the best chance of absorbing everything that I'm giving it. Most of us aren't really thinking it. We're thinking, oh, look, I've got a plate full of greens and sweet potatoes and sausage. Like, what a nourishing meal, right? But your kids are screaming in the background. You and your husband just got in a fight. Work was really stressful. And now you're just not, like, all of us have those experiences. All of us have days like that. So I'm not saying it's going to be perfect, but I'm just trying to give you some awareness of, oh, how can I take care of my body? This is why just taking probiotics typically is not enough to support your mood and your emotions. Because kids not eating, yeah, right? Like, I'm gonna have a meltdown. Go into the backyard and throw some rocks at the fence. That's what I say. It's better than yelling at your children, but it is therapeutic. So that being said, this is why just taking probiotics for your mood and your emotions and your sleep is typically not enough. And that's because we have to make sure we're actually, taking probiotics is good because it is helping to get the good bacteria where the good bacteria needs to go, getting the bad bacteria, out of the body. That's a primary function. And getting the neurotransmitters producing the way that they should be producing in the digestive tract. However, if we're not also looking at how we're eating, the kind of foods that we're eating to support healthy mood and digestion, we're going to end up not feeling super well. So that being said, absolutely getting on a good probiotic is essential if you're wanting to support healthy mood and emotions. And I have some good recommendations for you guys. B vitamins. This is huge, especially if you experience any kind of stress, because when we are stressed, even if it's, 2 to 3 days out of every week, your body is going to be burning through those B vitamins much quicker than it would if you weren't under stress. And most of us aren't getting enough B vitamins to begin with because we're not getting enough from our soil, from the food. The food isn't getting enough from the soil to begin with, then we're not actually getting enough from our food sources. Does that make sense? So I always tell people, in general, if you are under high periods of stress, then that is the time to increase your B vitamins and your adrenal support, because your body is going to be burning through those minerals that you need in order to feel healthy and stable and good and calm and all the things that you need. Okay. You really can't overdo it with B vitamins because your body will just pee out whatever you don't use. So if you're worried about the bottle says only take, 500 micrograms, that's not enough for anybody, number one. Number two, definitely not enough for you if you're under stress. And number three, you really can't overdo it because your body will just pee it out. So let's see, are B vitamins okay to take? Yes. With prenatals, yes, absolutely. Yep. So probiotics, B vitamins, and then adrenal support are going to be your three biggest things as far as supplements go. Now, that wouldn't necessarily be where I would start if the issues that we're dealing with are if we're not already looking at, am I eating enough? Am I eating often enough? And am I getting enough protein? Those are the three core places that you want to start. Okay. So let's see here. What are the functions for insulin and cortisol? So insulin is what helps to regulate your blood sugar. So when you eat food, insulin is released to help and get blood sugar into and out of the cells of the body. And it helps to manage how much blood sugar is floating around in your bloodstream. That's basically through the pancreas. So that's kind of my nutshell version of insulin. Now, cortisol, when it's really, really high or high for prolonged periods of time, is going to throw off your blood sugar regulation, which will then over long periods of time throw off your insulin. This is why we typically see perimenopausal women now having pre-diabetic symptoms, or women with undiagnosed PCOS that are I've always had blood sugar dysregulation issues, but now my insulin is in the toilet. That doesn't usually happen unless there's been a long period of time of blood sugar dysregulation and inflammation going on in the body. So cortisol, one of the ways that we can tell if cortisol is off is nighttime wakings. That's a big one. So waking up at 2 or 3 in the morning, waking up at midnight and not being able to go back to sleep, feeling really, really sluggish in the afternoon. So around 2 or 3 o'clock, you're just dragging your feet. That's a really good way to tell that your cortisol is having a really hard time. One of the other ways that we can tell if cortisol is off is chronic infections. That was actually one of my very first signs that I was having some adrenal fatigue issues. Was I was getting colds every 2 weeks. Literally every 2 weeks. And it was as soon as I would get better, I would come down with something else and it would take me forever to get better. And so that's one of the other ways that you can tell if your adrenals are off. Anxiety is another one. Anxiety or poor adrenal function will also create feelings of anxiety or panic for some people. So that's a thought for that. And then when I say adrenal support, I do have some specific supplement recommendations for that, but essentially typically it's a group or combination of herbs that actually help to create or support the adrenal glands. So they're nourishing herbs that actually help to strengthen the adrenal glands. I know that I just like fed you guys with a fire hose, so I'm anticipating some questions here. What questions do you ladies have for me while we're talking about how to support our mood and our emotions with food and lifestyle changes? Herbs, we have to be a little bit more cautious with in pregnancy just because they are quite a bit more potent. And there's a lot of reactions that the body can have, in pregnancy that we just try to be really careful with that. So for me, if I were working on supporting my adrenals in pregnancy, I would focus really heavily actually on mineral balancing. So for me, that's like I make an adrenal cocktail at around like 12 o'clock in the afternoon. And it's really simple. It's orange juice, like just orange juice with no added sugar or anything in it. Coconut water because it's full of potassium, and a pinch of salt. So you've got your potassium, you've got your magnesium, you've got your vitamin C, and you've got your salt that helps with electrolyte balancing. So that's a super easy way to get minerals in. Another one is like beef liver capsules are full of really good minerals. That can be really supportive of just overall like adrenal function without having some of the heavier hitting herbs that they haven't been studied in pregnancy for us to know if there's, any harmful impacts of that. That would be what I would do. And it could also be like, if you're struggling with a certain type of mood or emotion, you know what I mean? If you're like, gosh, I feel really low, but it's only in the afternoon. Or I feel like really anxious, but it's only in the morning. Like those are really great symptoms in terms of, they're not great symptoms. They're great symptoms in terms of helping us to identify where the struggle spots are and where we can best help you with that. Based on what you've said, my cortisol is way off. What do I need to do? So I would start with one, getting a good probiotic on board. Reducing inflammation to the gut plays a huge role in our adrenal gland function, but also getting on some adrenal support. And I will be putting a link to the protocol for that. The interesting thing with ADHD, and I'm still learning more about this, mainly because my daughter has it as well, and I have some like little bits of ADHD that kind of pop up that I'm like, is it a blood flow issue? Like, is my brain not getting blood flow to the frontal lobe, or is it a dopamine issue? Usually it's both. But yes, we absolutely want to remove any of the reasons why you might not be getting enough dopamine, right? So taking care of the c-diff, which you can do with herbals. So there are like herbal biocidin, will kill off c-diff. S. which is a certain bacterial a probiotic strain. But S. is a really good one, in particular for C. diff. If you're really wanting to dig into like, is it really a problem or is it not a problem? Because again, most digestive tracts will have C. diff, but they'll be in check with all of the other, all of the other bacteria are keeping it in check, right? Same thing with E. coli. Every intestinal tract has E. coli, but not everybody has an E. coli infection, right? And so if you're really wanting to dive into that, you could certainly do like a full GI map where we would be able to look at like everything that's going on. But some pretty classic symptoms of C. diff are irregular bowel movements, so alternating between constipation and diarrhea, where it gets better for a couple days and then it gets worse. Cramping, bloating, foul smelling gas, things like that can be some indicators that it's kind of a predominant problem happening in the gut. And then as far as supporting dopamine, zinc is actually one of the best supplements you can take for supporting dopamine. Zinc is a good one. Magnesium, zinc, and iron, they call that like I forget what they call that, but it's like the ADHD trio. Enough magnesium, zinc, and iron, those are all going to be really big, really important pieces to the puzzle there. Yeah, I'm going to include all of the supplements that I talked about today in that protocol. So you'll be able to kind of look around and see, if there was one thing in particular that stood out to you to go ahead and start with that too.